From Chelan PUD, Shawn Smith is joining us. He is the managing director of our energy resources, with a really long title for our energy traders, and frankly, the team of unsung heroes that sell all of our power and bring home the bacon so that we get ultra low rates and all of our public power benefits here in Chelan County. I'm really excited about this one. If you have questions for Shawn, you can drop them in the comments and he will answer them live. Welcome. Hello, Shawn.
Hey, good afternoon, Lacey. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for making the time.
You're welcome. I was surprised though you didn't also introduce your group that I manage. So,
That's
throwing
true.
out Customer Energy Solutions that handles our energy efficiency, our low income programs, and demand response. So very important, also part of my group. So I don't want to get energy resources. I want to give everyone accolades within the group. Definitely.
Well, thank you. Thank you for including us. Yeah, we're sort of this odd appendage. So the energy that we save, then you go out and you get to sell to then benefit Chelan County, which is a great, I don't know, it feels like a very congenial relationship.
Absolutely.
Cool. So I'm sure that there are going to be customer chats coming in live. I also have some questions that people sent in beforehand, but I'm really curious. Can you just super high level give us a sense of what does your team do? Like, what does it mean to be an energy trader or to sell power?
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand with the two projects we have, well, actually three projects we have, we generate a lot of extra power for versus what actually we need for our local load. And so roughly 80% of the power that is generated, we go out and sell to the wholesale market. And people ask, well, what does that mean? So there are different avenues, and we've divided it up sort of into a long-term where you sell 15 to 20-year contracts, and then a shorter term 5 to 10-year contracts, and then they go all the way down where you're selling in the day ahead market, the day before a market would run. So all those components, we sell those. We also sell environmental attributes because our hydro is considered carbon free. So we have some value there that we sell. And we use those resources to keep rates low for the county. And so those are our rates for our residents and are subsidized basically. And that's where all that goes. If that's high enough level for you.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, this is something that not everyone knows. I will drop a link into the comments where if they're curious about how our rates compare, we have the second lowest rates in the country. And I would be surprised if they weren't the second lowest in North America. Newfoundland Power might have an edge on us potentially.
Right.
But yes, our rates are incredibly low and actually below the cost that it requires for us to generate and deliver and maintain our systems so that everybody can keep the lights on, which is pretty cool. All right,
Absolutely.
great. Okay, so there was one question. So John actually, I think there's a lot of misconception about electric rates when folks hear about electric rates rising, maybe in places that have, 30 or 20 cent power instead of our 3 cent power. People might conflate that with here in the county. But in general, are our rates, are you foreseeing an increase coming down the line?
So we sell that 80% of the power. So that component, if rates are going up, that means probably energy in general is going up. So that is increasing while your rates will most likely they'll be just the general. We have that tiny increase every year of a small amount. So I don't expect much larger rate increases than that. Any energy, what is it? Are rates going to increase in the future? They're already high. So, I think we talked about this a little earlier. We're roughly about 80% less than a national average of rates, and they are also about 70% less than anything in the state. So our rates are extremely low. We're talking 3 cents a kilowatt there. So that energy, it's important to say that as energy prices increase, that 80% that we sell also, that income also goes up. It is important though to note, it's very helpful for the district if you conserve power in the evening, in the summer, in the morning, in the winter, because that's when prices are highest in the wholesale side of the market.
So when it's those hot summer afternoons, when everyone needs power for their ACs all along the Western grid, and then cold winter mornings when it's the coolest and everyone wakes up and wants
Right.
to warm up their home. Okay.
Right. And so when we have that energy conserved, we get to sell that into the wholesale market, which helps keeps rates low within the county. And Lacey is in that group that, if you contact them for energy efficiency, can help you with items like that. Because not only is it those mornings or those evenings, it's also, if we reduce something you reduce it completely 24 hours a day, that also helps us at all those hours. So those include those high peak hours. So a plug for one of my groups for that.
Absolutely. I could actually do a little, this is our website if you're curious about that. But more than that, I think folks, I would say most people probably don't choose to switch to a heat pump or insulate their home or get new windows because it saves energy that we can then sell elsewhere, but it sure makes your home a lot more comfortable and easier to use when you improve how well it's built and insulated and the controls for it as well. So
Right.
there's lots of other reasons to kind of improve your home,
And it
like
keeps they consume less electricity, which, their bill will be lower too.
absolutely. Yeah, if you switch to a heat pump from electric resistance and your heating bills get cut in half,
Right.
you notice. You
Absolutely.
notice in the winter. So this is a related question that Jen had sent in. She asked, how much energy can we use here at home before our rates go up? So I think this is sort of that balance between, so our 20% that we use here, we subsidize with the 80% that we sell elsewhere. At a certain point, it's going to tip, and we might not have as much power that we're selling elsewhere to subsidize our rates as much at home. Is that something on your radar?
Usually it's larger loads. I mean, homes usually don't generally use a ton of energy. However, if everybody starts using a lot more energy, then yes, and that's why we do have a pretty aggressive, or not aggressive, we have substantial energy efficiency program because we want people to get ahead of that curve as more and more things get electrified. We're very unique in the county where I came from and other utilities. In California, no one has heat pumps. Very few have electric stoves. They have gas hookups, and so they're connected multiple here. Here, we're pretty electrified already. So I wouldn't, there's that tipping point you talk about, and we do follow our load, and we always update our load studies. But, it's more about, I don't see that as a huge problem going forward, but we're always watching it. So it's always on our radar.
And what about adding big loads or that playing a factor in terms of our rates?
Big loads, we never, so we have a schedule that handles anything above what's called 5 megawatts. So those are very large loads, and those are handled separately for that. And that's sort of I talked about our long-term marketing strategy plan. I talked a little bit about this where we bifurcate and we say we have different contract types. We have a cost type of contract that we allocate 40 to 50% of our production into, and then we have our market-based slice contracts also, and that's 20 to 30%. And then we save some, that 20 to 30% for load. So those types of items we're always looking at, and we've said basically through our strategic plan that, you know, the county agreed that our rates, we don't want to impact them more than 5%. So any sort of large load that would economically develop the area, we wouldn't want that to impact our rates more than 5% in the long term. So we have a lot of flexibility in how we contract for that energy at the larger loads.
Okay, so if someone comes here and wants, to install a very high energy cotton candy factory, as one does, you're not going to give them our 3 cents. You're going
Correct.
to come up with some sort of calculation, whether it's market based, so it's like riding the wave of energy markets, plus
Right.
a little bit for our services, or some other rate structure that's going to be higher than our subsidized rate so that we're not losing out to that. Okay.
Yes. And
Okay.
that's usually the first call. People will see that rate and call us, and then we have to explain that to them that they don't
I
get that
see.
rate
Okay.
because the people of the county are very much like their rate, and they don't want it to be impacted.
True. Although, so Gordon, I've heard this not just from Gordon, but there's a few murmurings about, so one of the goals of Chelan PUD is to take the revenues from our hydropower and pump it back into Chelan County to benefit the county. One way that we can benefit the county is by supporting local economic development. And in the past, we've used sort of lower rates to attract or incentivize large employers or other things like that. I mean, I might be going back too far into the history of things, but there have been questions around, is that something that we would look to in the future to support and develop our, local employers and things like that as a public power benefit?
Right, and that was I touched on it a little bit earlier. It was more about when we went through the strategic planning process of 2020 to 2024. That was within that context. It was still to not impact retail rates more than 5%.
So
So
we'll pay 5% for economic development as customers generally. That's what was
I
said.
mean, that's what it was supposedly agreed. That was what was agreed to within the strategic plan. That's not a hard and fast rule that it will happen. It
Sure.
just depends what happens out of those schedules when people come into town.
Okay, cool. So you have this whole wing that's just figuring out what kind of rates all of our cotton candy manufacturing folks are going to
Yes,
have. Okay.
absolutely. And that's
Okay.
cross the district, I would say. That's not just my group.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Now, if folks are listening and they have some
Mhm.
questions, oh, we do have a question. If you have questions, whether you're listening on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, you can just drop them in the chats and I can feed those to Shawn. We have one here. So, this is about clean energy goals. So, you know a lot about CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, Shawn, which is now under effect. Hassan's asking, does Chelan PUD benefit from the various 100% clean energy goals in the Western states? What's the premium for our hydropower for power purchase agreements or the wholesale market?
Uh, so I would say, the Clean Energy Transformation Act officially becomes, it's started, but it doesn't get quote mandated till 2030. So that is we have had increases of interest in clean energy within the district. Um, Now, a specific price, there's no actual price in any liquid market that states what is the exact value of that. So that's all negotiable, and it really depends on what product you're selling. So the range is so vast as to probably not make much sense to the customers. But yes, we do commoditize that to the extent possible, and that really varies from contract to contract, year to year, and then I would see that increasing over the years until there is a lot more renewables on the grid too. So there'll be some crossover too, right? Because there's also a lot of renewable development going on. And this is a pretty basic supply demand issue.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So do you see a premium price coming for hydropower in the future as more
It's already
legislation takes
started,
effect?
yeah.
Okay.
Because there's already, right now, utilities within the state of Washington have to have a glide path towards this 2030 80% requirement of, clean energy. So you've already seen people trying to start to procure for that. So they may be, we have a large hydro portfolio that we don't have to worry about that for us, but other utilities are interested in purchasing for that. And also, beyond just Western states, there are a lot of large companies that they have their own 100% goals, right? And so
Mhm.
those people also are interested in hydropower, for example, too.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of other renewables coming onto the grid. However, if you're running something that requires 24/7, 365 power, you're not going to get 100% renewable energy unless it relies on things like hydro that you could have in the darkest, least windy nights. So it does help to have hydro as well as wind and solar and other resources available so that you can get, a pretty flat load profile.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be critical. They want to go 100% renewable by 2045 here in the state. And without hydro, uh, even then, you're going to need some incredible technology advancements to reach those goals for the darkest hours. You can have weeks of no sun up here. You can have, weeks of no wind. So it's going to hydro will be a key component there.
Yeah, for sure. So, are there any plans currently to add renewables to Chelan County? I know that we've had questions specifically about putting solar on our service center that's going in, but even more broadly, are there plans for sort of utility scale? I don't think we're talking about necessarily homeowners who can, if they want to, add solar panels and connect those to their homes. But I think this is more for large scale renewables coming here.
No plans within the county. I mean, we do have a what's called an interconnection agreement, so people can get in line and if they so choose, and put their own large utility scale solar in. So those type of entities can do it and get in our line and to deliver power to the grid. So nothing internally. We always like to follow the prices. Right now, renewables have actually solar and wind and energy storage with the supply chain issues have actually ticked up in price. For many, many years, they've ticked down in price. And so they're actually quite a substantially bit higher than our hydro right now. So we'll always follow that plan. And, as we have some larger loads come online, we may revisit this, but we follow it, but no plans currently.
Okay, so we don't have any plans to increase our generation. We've got Rock Island, Rocky Reach, Chelan. We're not really looking to add any other large generation.
Not at this moment. It depends. People, that interconnection queue can also be people that, I'm sorry, my screen just went blank here. So I'm
That's
just
okay.
trying to get back online here. So if we have to quote purchase energy for them, and that requires us to go contract for one of these, we follow the prices and those.
Can you talk about what does interconnection mean?
Interconnection means, so we have an electric grid. So large generation and large users of electricity have to file an application with the utility. And studies have to be done to make sure the grid is a very fickle kind of organism almost, as you think. And so adding a lot of load to it at one time, or adding a lot of generation, the engineers, which I am not one of them, has to do a lot of studies to make sure the grid remains stable. And so that's a long, involved process. A lot of times requires upgrades to the system. And so that is what's the interconnection queue, or they fill out applications so they can be studied and figure out how much power can go on, what kind of upgrades are required, and how long it will take.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people don't always realize that when you flick on a switch, the power is sort of instantaneously powering your light bulb. There's not this delay, there's not storage. When you want power is when power needs to be available. And so
Right.
matching up the supply and the demand is pretty much moment to moment.
Right.
And so, of
And to
course,
keep it stable, it really has to be in a very tight band. That it's sometimes hard to comprehend how, that balancing act is quite a dance.
yeah. Okay, cool. Now that we've completely made our grid seem realistic, I actually have a question about this. I'm going to scroll down because Maria had asked a question about rolling blackouts. So let's talk about our grid, which is a very
Sure.
delicate dance, and it does run from British Columbia all the way down to California, over into Arizona, like Montana. The Western grid is not a small
Right.
set of resources and users. We're talking about millions and millions of people who use the electric resources on the same grid. And so, what happens when there's an event in California, and how does that impact us up here, or how could we benefit through power sales? How is it all interconnected?
So I think it's, when I read that question, it's pretty important to bifurcate the two. Texas, we talked about a massive event, where days, people actually died, multiple days power was out. They had to shut down large swaths of the grid. And it was quite a catastrophe, basically. California, we're talking, actually was down there during the rolling blackouts. It was 2 hours. There was a lot of getting close to having larger events, but 2 hours of rolling blackouts. So very two different events. So we also up here have what's called our own balancing authority. So we talked about that balancing act. We actually manage that ourselves here at Chelan. So I don't expect us to have these same types of issues. We have some reserve sharing agreements currently, so we can call on other utilities in the events of emergencies with other utilities in the area. And because of our large hydro presence throughout the region, I don't see an issue. There is still a lot of planning, because we've talked earlier about a lot of these intermittent renewables, the solar and wind. A lot of those are coming online, and so that makes the grid a little less reliable. So you have to be able to follow those ebbs and flows if cloud cover comes over, or if the wind suddenly stops blowing, or but the same thing can happen with transmission outages and the like. So recently, in the last 3 years, a resource adequacy program. So that's where all the utilities in the West are getting together outside of California, because California has their own reliability program, have gotten together and actually filed rules with FERC, the Federal Electric Regulatory Commission, and we are going to start a program to have this sharing across the region, so that we've seen.
So if someone is short, they need power, somebody else can say, "It's cool, I got you,"
Yeah,
and we
yeah,
can match up that supply and demand. Okay.
yeah. And you have a showing that's like 7 months out. So all the utilities 7 months ahead of time are making this plan, saying, this is how, I'm coming to the table with this much power. I'm estimating this much load, and then a little, we call it a reserve, planning reserve margin, which is just a little extra for those cases when there should be, if there's big problems.
Yeah. So when you talk about the grid, you're right. It is adding complexity, adding more loads, people that are using power, and adding more generation, people that are producing power, makes things very complicated very quick. However, there are some big benefits to sharing a grid as well. So I was actually recently up in Alaska, and Alaska is one of the largest areas of microgrids in the world. They have very few interconnections. It's mostly every utility for themselves, with the exception of what they call the rail belt, where
Right.
I believe there's 5 utilities that connect. And so when the power goes down for a utility, the utility has to figure out how to get it back. They might send some line workers over and other support staff from other utilities, but there's no relying on the neighbor's dam to bring power back to your area. And
Right.
so it is interesting when we talk about, people often talk about California and Texas. So Texas is kind of doing their own thing over there. There's a little bit of flow that can happen in and out of Texas in terms of energy, but not much. They're kind of their own grid. California, however, is part of the Western grid. And so there have been events like in the last couple of weeks actually in California, there were events where it was getting hot, it was late in the afternoon, and the California sent out text alerts to all of their customers, the big manufacturing places that use a lot of energy, all the way down to small consumers, just households like us. And because they are connected to a larger grid, including re- resources like Chelan County's dams, as well as people electively choosing to turn off certain things during a really critical time, California didn't have rolling blackouts when otherwise they could have if they were just their own isolated island of energy. So there are benefits to being on a larger grid. It's more complicated, but we get to help each other out. And Chelan PUD plays a really important role in that because we have excess generation. So we can help out. We can help out other places in the West, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, we even, during that time, we moved out some, we moved more water, and we did some things to help deliver more power to the grid during that time. So very important. You know, that's Texas. It has very limited connection to the rest of the country with that, and that is one of the main reasons they had a much worse problem than someplace like California. With
Hmm.
Matt in California has massive connection to the rest of the West.
So I have to ask, was that a big windfall for Chelan County? California's ales, like their heat wave, did that translate to more revenue for us?
Yes. So wholesale revenue prices are not 100%, but largely tied to supply and demand issues. So the demand was very high and the supply wasn't as high, and so prices were very high. And as uh, a a utility that has excess power during those times, we are going to have larger inflows of capital, right? Of money, basically. So those we
That's
did.
a very diplomatic way to say. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean that's
No, but
that. When you look over the course of the whole year, it's not it all averages out throughout the whole year, but it's you know it works out. We don't have, most of that energy is sold almost like through a third party, right? Because we don't have what direct transmission rights all the way down to California, it should be known. So we sell it up here, right? And then different people move it down to California.
okay. But circling back to how we started this conversation, the idea of reducing our energy usage during super hot afternoons in the summer when other places could use it can help. Same with winter
Yes,
mornings. Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay. Great. Okay. Can we talk about EVs? I know you're an EV driver. You like EVs. What does it
I,
mean
I
for our
have one
grid?
of our two cars is an EV, so I do like EVs. If for people that and I like my gas car too. What I like about EVs is I really like the acceleration. If people haven't driven in one, I think you'll be quite surprised because it's basically instant torque. Um,
Mhm.
and I do like that when I live here, it's basically 30 cents a gallon equivalent. So when you see gas at $5 a gallon and you're basically filling up and at home for 30 cents a gallon, that's a quite a selling point,
Or you can
so
do it for free. You can charge for free at one of our charging stations, which are on our website as well.
right around town.
Yeah.
So here at the district, over at Pybus Market, over at the Walla Walla Park. So we've got different locations throughout. What does mean for our grid and rates? I know you had, I don't know if you put it in, we had an earlier power hour session on this.
We do. Yeah,
Yeah,
this was Power Hour 7, so this was in July. If you go to chelanpud.org/power hour, you can see all of the past episodes, and we did a deep dive with Randy and Ann Brooks out of Chelan talking about EVs, and we deep dove this question of what what do EVs mean? But sort of high level, when you talk
I love
about
it.
your trading, have you been looking at how EVs can play a role in this?
Yeah, so right now we're about 600 EVs. You can go on the Department of Transportation website and you can see it's not only the categories are 100% pure EVs, and then we also have what's called plug-in electric vehicles. So that's where you still have the gas engine there. And these cars, roughly, you charge up to 30 to 50 miles. And so you'll run on electric for 30 to 50 miles, and then it switches over to the gas engine. Uh, and roughly only about 600 of the 70,000 vehicles within the county are currently electric. Um, of course, places like Link have about half their buses that are electric. Um, currently we don't see it as a great issue currently. We've done some studies where it looks like longer term, if like everybody had electric vehicles, it could increase our load by about 16%. So not nothing, but something we are following. So some of the impacts that could happen, you look at, and our distribution side's looking at this, where if a large number of electric vehicles moved into a specific neighborhood, for example, right? We got to make sure that transformer can handle that. It's interesting to think about this because we've talked about we're one of these unique places where everything's electrified, basically. People say, well, I have a propane for that, but we'll just say, for the sake of argument here, everyone's electrified. A water heater roughly is about the same charging level of what's called a level 2. So if you go one step above, your 240 and use that to charge your car, you're using about the same power as what you're using your water heater. So not a tremendous difference. And everyone has at least one water heater in town. Some people have two, and very few people currently have cars. So those are things we've got to watch. We are updating our transportation electrification roadmap, which will be presented to the board coming up here end of this year, beginning of next. And so we want to make sure we are ahead of this. And I don't see a great impact on the rates. And then, like I talked, these localized areas of the grid it could impact, but we are definitely following all that. Again, we'll want to be. We talked multiple times about these early morning winter hours and late evening summer hours, and this will be something we'll work on trying to develop. Charging rate, not necessarily rates, but programs to help move people off that time. As long
Yeah,
as they
charge
come
when it
home,
makes sense.
charge when it makes sense. After 9 or 10 o'clock at night, probably 10 p.m. And you still have a full charge when you wake up in the morning, as long as you've got that higher level charger in your house. And that things like that will be very important going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So, Shawn, we did have one other question that came in. So, just a little background. You used to work at a California utility, which sounds like
A couple.
a couple, a few, you know. And then you joined us gratefully. So how have these things differed? We often hear sort of the negative side up here about California's grid. Um, how is your experience there different than working here in Chelan County, where sort of our business model is very different than a lot of the utilities in California, where we are a surplus power generator, and in California they're bringing in power to sell.
Right. So you actually in California, it seems like a mess because I would say it partially is. So rates there are.
This is not a. I'm sorry, you're cutting out.
No, so the rates there, I mean, just to put it in perspective, I probably paid 8 times more for electricity where I live down there. So that's 800% more than what we pay for up here. And I wasn't even a heavy user. Some people pay 10 times, 1,000% more. So they've had, let's see, how can I explain this simply? So they've had a few, they've had aggressive renewable targets, which were required by the utilities that didn't necessarily match up with all the market rules. So, they had to meet a certain amount of their power from renewables. And what that meant was a lot of solar, especially a lot of solar came onto the grid. And so they have a lot of solar during the middle of the day. And what happens is that solar drops off as the sun is going down. But on hot summer days, you still have a huge load requirement from people coming home, turning on their air conditioner if it's 100 degrees out in our valleys. We talked earlier about the resource adequacy programs, right? About having that enough. So one of the big problems was that resource adequacy wasn't counted necessarily accurate. Like you would still get some, as a utility, some value with that resource adequacy program, even though your power was basically, you weren't generating any power.
So each hour, each instant when you needed power didn't always add up. You might have
right, because
had
they
it
just said
sometimes, but not all the time.
Like they would get, I'll just give you, if I had 100 megawatt, so 100, we'll use the word megawatt. So they would only get about 10 or 20% value in that resource adequacy program. However, they could be producing 0. So you start to destabilize the grid, and that's sort of one glaring weakness that they have. And you talk about some of the issues with reliability down there. You get programs like that aren't properly developed, and it exacerbates, especially when there's heat along the entire West Coast. Like if it's cool up here, we can ship power to them, they'll be okay. But suddenly if you get this heat dome up in Portland and it was still hot down there, right, things can get pretty messy in a hurry. So that's where you see a lot of the issues coming from. They've been able to survive it the last few years, though. And I like to put it in perspective as compared to Texas, though. Like we're really talking about 2
Shawn,
hours.
You're just taking out other states. California is a mess. However, Texas.
Yeah, Texas is a mess.
Okay.
Right. And then, when you said they were asking people to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. They were also asking people to unplug their cars during those hours too, right? The evening.
Flex alerts. As someone who studies the communication that utilities have, I find flex alerts fascinating and a really creative win, because there's no financial incentive, there's no carrot, there's no stick, there's just, hey neighbor, let's not have our power go out. Let's work together. And people choose to work together and the power stays on. Like, what a great news story is that?
Right. I think the other component that's sort of hard, if you're in the industry, you understand, but it's still really hard, is the transmission that gets power around everywhere. It's very difficult to build that anywhere in the country, and especially places like anywhere, even up here, California, doesn't matter. And so, basically every conference I go to, it's always about we need more transmission because a lot of these renewables are out in the middle of the desert, or they're out, where wind is, or where not a lot of people live. And, that's another, I would say that's a problem with the whole grid, is that transmission builds have been delayed for decades and decades. And, if we really want to progress to this 100% clean future, there has to be movement in the transmission area.
Our highways are a little bit too small to
yes.
accommodate all of the energy that we need to transfer around.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Are you up for a heckling question?
Sure.
We have a heckler. How's it going without the mid-C calling the shots?
So you mean our too damn independent operation? Is that, I think what they mean is, we used to coordinate between the three mid-Cs
so Grant, Douglas,
and us would all coordinate how the water would flow down our projects together and optimize that. And over the last few years, that no longer happens. So we started our own program. We're doing fine. Again, not optimized, but I think we've gone through the process and are doing just fine. And that's where we are. We're, it's not, it could be better, obviously, but that's how.
So coordinating water flows along the river would make coordination easier.
Yes. Well, and
cool.
More megawatts would be produced at the highest priced hours, right? As a total between the three, right? So you could get that coordination.
Okay. Yeah. All right, sweet. Well, for folks that are listening, this is the last call for questions. I have one more that came in from before the show, but if you have questions, just drop them in the chat for Shawn. The last question that we have is sort of related to that previous one. How is climate change going to affect hydropower?
So I would say right now, like especially down south, not to, California again, Arizona, all the you see some, I drove up here a year and a half ago and went by Shasta Lake. Wow, it's 100 yards of empty. And up here, however, the Columbia River draws on a lot larger area. All the, up into Canada, this huge, the Rockies up there down to here, we have a very large basin to draw from. And in fact, we're over 100% of average this year. We've had 2 La Ninas over the past 2 years. Not that it guarantees more precipitation, but we've had actually very good water years. However, that doesn't mean we won't have lower water in the future. So we always, as part of our planning, we always have our stress water condition scenario, which is we're looking at 1 in 20 year events. So we always plan to that. So we don't take anything for granted. But so far, we haven't been impacted like the south of us.
Okay, great. Okay, we have one question sneaking in here. Jan is asking about smart meters, if you're up for fielding this one. Andy Wendell, who was our guest last time, actually, I learned a lot from him about smart meters. So Jan's saying that she's heard that they're dangerous, and she's a little bit worried that you're installing them on our homes. Can you comment?
I don't really, that's not my group. No, I mean, I don't think they're dangerous. I don't.
Yes. No, this is totally fair. This is a bit of a left field question. I'll link in the chat, Jan, to Andy's answer. The short of it is that there's a couple of different kinds of, how your cell phone talks to, how your cell phone sends out signals, and how your your smart meter would send out signals are pretty similar. The difference is you put your cell phone up to your ear. You don't generally do that with a smart meter attached to your home. And the signal that's coming into your cell phone is pretty regular. Smart meters, because it can be a lot of data because of all the different homes, we package and we bundle the data being sent. So it's not that your smart meter is sending things continuously or as regularly as your cell phone. It is something that's bundled, and maybe once every hour, every 6 hours, there's a bundle of data that's going to a local collector site that then is being fed to the PUD. So in terms of, Andy spoke about ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. There's been a ton of tests about smart meters. The bottom line is absolutely look into it. I will give you a link to Andy's answer, but essentially there's not concern about the safety of smart meters going in, and there's a lot of benefit.
Yeah, this smart meters for us and my group will tremendously help us figure out where energy is being used, energy efficiency programs that can be developed, and really help keep rates low within the district. And also, be able to send out, know where outages are, and be able to service people a lot quicker. I mean,
Outages are huge. That's a
yeah, and
really
then
big one.
and for our side, the more insight we have into how power is used locally is again to the benefit of the rest of the whole county in terms of keeping the rates low.
For sure. Yeah, and we're not talking about knowing when your hair dries on or not. We don't have optics into that kind of thing. Sometimes folks think that smart meters are getting a lot of data. They're not. You can't, pulling numbers every 5 minutes or something doesn't tell you much about what's going on in a home. We're talking generally about our larger users and when peak power is happening and in what areas, and how we can create the infrastructure to be able to support that. And yeah, so it's not, we can't really see much into
Right.
what folks are doing. All right, perfect. Kurt is asking about EDAM. So
Yeah.
first,
So
what's
we're
EDAM?
exactly
Second,
so.
is it meaningful? So Kurt Miller, he is the executive director of Northwest River Partners, I believe.
Oh,
And
so yeah, and
they will actually be on the next Power Hour. So we
great.
can talk about this, but answer his question, please.
We could have literally a whole show about market development, and we haven't touched on it yet today. So there, the extended day ahead market is part of California ISO, their operators market that they're developing for the West. So right now we mostly transact in what's called a bilateral market. So you trade between two people. A
So
day
you
ahead
call up
market.
your friend who needs
Yes,
power and you
right.
say, yeah, cool, I got your power.
I
This
got
is an
100
alternative.
megawatts, here. So what this is an actual, the day before you need the energy, there's buyers and sellers in a general area. So this market development, there's like ISO, and there's a competing market development called Markets Plus, which is being sponsored by Southwest Power Pool. So they're also an operator, but they're further sort of, their base office is Arkansas, but they have sort of a group of if you look above Texas, there are a bunch of states above
The
Texas.
prairies.
Straight up, right, the prairies that operate. So they're looking to expand west too. And what's happening right now is it is a meaningful market, most likely, because these two are competing against one another for the day ahead market. And we talked a lot about sharing power across the region. And so a lot of people think to reach these energy goals that multiple states like us have, to have that possibility, we're going to need to be integrated across the West and share. Transmission issues, I would say, yes, given the transmission issues, I still think these markets, one of them will, if not both, will be operating in the future. The question, we're following both very closely. and we'll see how they work out and if it makes sense for our customers for us to join one of these markets. So my group is heavily involved in both of these and following them, and we kind of always harken back to best for the most for the longest as we look at these markets. And so absolutely, it takes up quite a bit of our time.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. One last one, and then you are free to go. I promise. So, Shawn, do you build hydroelectric dams? I know you're an economist by training, but
yeah, that would be Brett's question. Bickford is our generation transmission person. I would say our groups work on the dams, but actually build them ourselves we do not. So we are the public utility district that manages our 3 projects, but we don't actually build them out. We don't, and especially we're not building dams around outside of the county on spec with our employees.
Yeah, our last dam was built in '63, so it's been a minute. The people who were involved in that build out probably have retired at this point. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Shawn. We're getting some emojis and things like that coming in. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know that this is you can deep dive into energy trading and really get in the weeds. It's a pretty complex part of our business that doesn't, in my opinion, get the glory that it deserves. Like, thank you for bringing in all of the funding that makes our rates possible and our parks and the new pickleball courts and splash pad, which is really, as county residents, what we care about. So thank you and your team for doing all of the work to make those things happen.
You're welcome. And yeah, it really is on our team. I'm guiding them, but they really do the heavy lifting here. So it's all accolades to my team.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Next time we have on Austin. What is your last name? Austin Rohr. I just met with him up in Alaska. Austin Rohr from the Northwest River Partners. So this is a group of folks who have hydropower around our region. And we're going to be talking more generally about hydropower. Instead of deep diving the markets, we're going to be chatting about how hydropower is a component of our energy supply that's important right now. And also, I think in the future, as you mentioned, Shawn, it's going to play an increasingly important role as we try to transition to more renewable energy resources. Yeah. All right.
Filling into the dark corners, they call it.
Yes. That's great. That's a great analogy. All right, cool. Well, thank you, Shawn. Have a great afternoon.
Take care, everybody.